What if your worst moment of disrespect became the defining moment of your life? That's exactly what happened when a white officer spat on a man, only to find out later that man was his new police chief. You won't believe how this story unfolds. In a bustling city where tensions ran high and respect seemed to be in short supply, an incident unfolded that shook an entire police department. A white officer, blinded by prejudice, made a mistake so grave it became the talk of the town. But the twist? The man he disrespected turned out to be his new boss. Officer Jim Reynolds had been on the force for over a decade. Known for his strict, no-nonsense attitude, he was both respected and feared. But beneath the badge, Jim harbored biases he didn't even recognize, or perhaps didn't want to admit. To him, every interaction was a transaction of power. One rainy Monday morning, as Jim patrolled the downtown streets, he noticed a man standing outside the precinct. The man was tall, well-dressed, and holding a briefcase. He was black. To Jim, that was all that mattered. Jim approached the man with an air of authority. Without greeting him, he snapped, "You lost or something?" The man, startled by Jim's tone, calmly responded, "I'm here for a meeting." But Jim didn't buy it. His biases clouded his judgment, and instead of treating the man with dignity, he escalated. As the tension grew, Jim muttered a derogatory comment under his breath and, shockingly, spat at the man's feet. The man's calm demeanor cracked just slightly, but he said nothing. He simply looked Jim in the eye as if measuring him. Then, without another word, he turned and entered the precinct. Jim walked away, smugly believing he'd handled the situation. But the day had only just begun. Later that morning, the precinct was abuzz with activity. Rumors swirled about a major announcement. The department was getting a new police chief. Jim, like everyone else, was curious but wasn't overly concerned. He had his routines, his rank, and his sense of superiority. What could possibly change? At 10 a.m. sharp, all officers were called into the briefing room. The room fell silent as the commissioner stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce your new Chief of Police, Chief Marcus Carter." As the applause began, the doors opened, and in walked the man from that morning. The man Jim had disrespected, the man he'd spat at. Jim's heart sank. Chief Carter took the podium, his presence commanding the room. He began with a short speech about unity, respect, and the need for change within the department. His words were calm but firm, and they struck a chord. But Jim couldn't focus. His mind raced with the memory of what he'd done just hours earlier. After the speech, Chief Carter invited the officers to introduce themselves. One by one, they lined up, shaking his hand and offering polite welcomes. Jim dreaded his turn, but there was no escaping it. When it was his turn, he approached nervously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Officer Reynolds," he stammered, extending a hand. Chief Carter looked at him for a long moment. Then, to Jim's surprise, he smiled. A small, knowing smile. "Ah, Officer Reynolds," Carter said, shaking his hand firmly. "We've met before, haven't we?" Jim froze. He knew he had two choices: lie or own up to his actions. Summoning what little courage he had, he nodded. "Yes, sir. I'd like to apologize for my behavior earlier. It was out of line." Chief Carter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he held Jim's gaze, letting the silence stretch. Then, he said something Jim would never forget. "Officer Reynolds, respect is the foundation of this badge. Without it, we're nothing. I hope today serves as a lesson, not just for you, but for all of us." The words were firm, but there was no malice in them. They carried weight, and Jim felt it. Over the next few weeks, Chief Carter began implementing changes within the department. He held workshops on implicit bias, introduced community outreach programs, and emphasized accountability. Jim, humbled by his experience, became one of the first to sign up for these programs. For the first time in years, he began to question his own beliefs and behaviors. The story of Chief Carter and Officer Reynolds became a symbol of change, not just within the department, but in the broader community. It was a reminder that respect and accountability can bridge even the deepest divides. If you found this story thought-provoking, don't forget to subscribe for more eye-opening stories like this.